Most people ruin a really great heavy guitar tone chasing clarity by dialing down the gain or bringing up the mid-range. But by doing this, they end up with a tone that is weak, tame, and lifeless. I struggled with this for years until I found a trick that delivers clarity without sacrificing heaviness. And it's one I've relied on the past decade of doing professional mixing. So in this video, I'm going to show you a really easy and reliable way to get an instantly more defined and hard edge to your guitar tone. I did this on the last few Solosis records that I mixed, and although I didn't mix the last two Architects records that I played on, I sent Zach my pre-processed guitar stem with this applied to it. And one of those records went to #1 in 2 countries, and it's all because of this. So whether or not you produce, mix, or you just play live, or you just play at home for fun, and you use something like a Kemper Quad Cortex or an Axe-Fx, you can do this too. As someone that grew up listening to Pantera and Slipknot, dialing down the gain for me just doesn't sound heavy enough. If you imagine the first 2 Slipknot records and they just had just enough gain, they wouldn't be anywhere near as intense sounding. Same thing if you listen to A New Level by Pantera and that intro riff had half the amount of gain and they bumped the mid-range up, it just wouldn't sound anywhere near as good. This can be personal preference, genre dependent, but what I'm going to show you is a way to get more clarity and bite with your guitar tone when you don't want to turn the gain down. And think of this as like sharpening a blade and just removing soft edges to your tone. So about 10 years ago, I got obsessed trying to recreate some of my favorite guitar tones on records that I liked. I just got FabFilter Pro Q2 EQ, and this has got a great frequency analyzer, and I'd essentially rip a bit of guitar from a record that I liked, import it into Cubase, and then just see how close I could get my source tone sounding like this record tone. And with the FabFilter frequency analyzer, I was able to see where my tone was different. And this led me to discover a consistent pattern in all the guitar tones that I loved. Now, I'm not saying this is what all my favorite mix engineers do, but this is how I managed to achieve and understand what it is that I didn't like about my guitar tones. So let me show you step by step, starting with the most overlooked part of your guitar tone, the speaker. And before we go on, I always recommend using a Shure SM57 as your guitar microphone, whether you're using a real cab or if you're just using a plug-in. Go for that mic, especially if you're new to mixing and don't have any real preference at this point. It's the kind of industry standard for getting a heavy guitar tone, and it's my favorite microphone to use. So if you're working with a real guitar cabinet, you're able to crank it up at home, then what you want to do is get the microphone dead center on every single speaker, shoot all of them out and just see which one sounds the best to you. If you're in the digital domain and you're working with plugins or a Quad Cortex, then just cycle through impulse responses and find one that you think sounds the best. And the best way to really hear how your raw guitar tone sounds is to double track it, pan it left and right. And if you can check a riff in the context of a mix with some drums and bass, it's always better to get an idea of how your guitar tone is going to sound checking 2 guitars pan left and right playing a very simple riff as opposed to 1 guitar in mono. Okay, so once you've selected the best sounding speaker, the next thing to get right is the microphone placement. One way to get a really clear guitar tone is just to go dead center on the speaker. But the problem with this is on most speakers, it's going to be crazy fizzy up there. It's going to sound like a wasp's nest or like TV static on top of your guitar tone. But if you start to move the microphone too far off center, you're going to introduce some weird cab frequencies and it just starts to sound weird, like there's a hairdryer on in the back of your guitar tone. Moving the microphone too far off center, you lose clarity and note definition. So how do you find the right mic placement? Go back to dead center and just move the microphone off until you start to hear just a slight reduction in that fizz on the top of your tone. And I'll show you using a plugin what this will look like on most speakers. But don't just copy this, just listen and use your ears because every speaker is different. So up next, we're going to load up an EQ. And if you're using something like a Quad Cortex or an Axe-Fx, make sure you load up an EQ at the very end of your chain after the cabinet. Create a really deep and tight notch around 6K, and we're going to reduce this by at least 10 dB. You want your Q value pretty narrow, so somewhere between 5 and 10 usually works best. Anyone that's ever owned any of my Kemper profiles that I've put out since 2016 has probably seen this EQ move on most of the profiles that I've made. I'd apply this type of EQ at the very end of the chain. And it's also something that I've done in a lot of the mix-ready IRs from the impulse response pack as well. If I boost this area to show you what it sounds like, this is the epitome of that wasp's nest kind of fizzy sound on top of your tone. So by making this deep cut here, it's instantly giving you a harder edge to your guitar tone, exactly where the bite and pick attack lives. The problem that I see a lot of people doing when it comes to removing fizz from guitar tones is using a low pass filter to kind of get rid of a lot of that high end. The problem is if you go too close to where your bite is, so if you go all the way up to 6K, you're going to be removing a lot of that top end air from your tone. And although you don't really hear much of it, leaving some of that in your tone is going to add a bit more life to your mix and your guitar tone. So what I tend to do is do a narrow notch around this area and leave in everything above 10 and 12K. This EQ notch gives you a simultaneously bright and dark guitar tone. You can put more emphasis in the 3 to 5K area, which is where all the bite and the pick attack aggression is of your tone. But if you leave in some of that stuff around 10K or even boost 10K, you'll add a bit more presence and life to your guitar tone. So this allows you to get rid of the fizz, but put a really sharp edge onto your tone. And to give you a broader context of what this is doing, I'm going to talk about something at the other end of the spectrum in the low end on kick drums. When you have a kick drum that has a ton of low end and a ton of low mid range and you start to carve this out, you end up revealing what sounds like a deeper tone, leaving in the area of low end that you want to draw the listener's ear to. And this means you can then turn that kick drum up and it sounds deeper even though you've removed a lot of low end and low mid range. So by removing frequencies around where the pick attack bite is on your guitar tone, you're actually putting more emphasis exactly where you want to draw attention to, which is all the pick attack, which usually is between 2 and 5K. Now, despite everything that I've talked about, all this kind of stuff is subjective, and two of my favorite guitar tones like Formation of Damnation and Brotherhood of the Snake by Testament have quite a lot of 6K in. So don't just take this as something you have to do all the time, but understanding this, understanding that removing frequencies draws your attention to other frequencies is going to help bring clarity where you want it. So try this trick out for yourself, see how you find it, take these principles and you can apply them in different ways. And if you're still struggling to get a great guitar tone, then check this video out next.